How do you recharge? Do you pause? Do you need to do something very specifically in order to replenish yourself, to fill your own bucket, so to say? And how do you pause to celebrate the things that you've accomplished, the things that you have worked hard at and achieved before you jump on to the next thing? Those are just some of the things that I reflect on in this Rambling Reflections from the Road episode.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 480 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Today's episode is a solo episode, a rambling reflection from the road episode, as I am rambling reflectively on the road back from an ad hoc 2-night camping trip. I'll introduce that, and that will be the main section of the show, and that's coming up after this word from this episode's sponsor. Hey there, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre with a quick question for you. What are you doing November 10th through 14th, 2026? Because if you write books, or if you want to, I'd love to see you in Las Vegas at AuthorNation. I'm speaking there, and I'm going to be hanging out, so just come on up and say hi. AuthorNation, the world's largest indie conference, is an annual gathering where authors come together to support one another, collaborate, and push the craft and business of writing forward. It's not a stuffy conference. It's a room full of people who get it. All of it. The grind, the sweat, the frustration, the goals of getting your story into the hands of the right readers. Whether you're just starting out or you're already running your own publishing business, AuthorNation has it for you. Check it out at AuthorNation.live. And I'll see you in Vegas. As mentioned, this is Rambling Reflections from the Road, something I recorded on the way back from a recent camping trip. It was sort of an unplanned or unexpected, planned, but very last minute planned camping trip to the provincial park, the Point Farms Provincial Park, which is on Lake Huron, which is Canada's, or Ontario's, west coast. Lake Huron, if you take a look at a map, you'll understand why it's been called that by the Tourism Association. But it's so fascinating. I'm probably about to receive the Lake Huron portion of the book back from my publisher and editor, Noel at Wolsack and Wynn, as we're in the throes of editing that Ghost Tours of the Great Lakes. And looking out over the lake, sitting there, sunset, or just sitting by the lake and looking out over this inland sea really spoke to me in a different way. Because I wasn't just thinking about the beauty and the tranquility and how awesome it is to be near big water and beautiful, gorgeous nature, but I was also thinking, because of the research I did for the Great Lakes book, of all the dead people, all the folks who have perished and died, the tragedies that surround the lakes. Obviously, you can't get into telling ghost stories without that, but it was really, I always felt small when I sit beside big water like that, or when I'm in this incredibly gorgeous, beautiful, natural surrounding. I always feel small, like a peon in the universe. And I felt even more that way when I was sitting in front of the lake. But I also felt incredibly re-energized and refreshed. And it was a bit of gymnastics trying to manipulate my schedule. Had to rearrange a bunch of meetings. I managed to do some other meetings and some work by using the Wi-Fi connection that is at the park office, but managed to free up as much of my time as possible. I mean, if Liz is off and I'm not taking advantage of how flexible and how lucky I am in terms of the schedule that I can keep, if I don't take advantage of it now, when am I going to take advantage of it? I do mention in this reflection, I'm reading Matt Haig's The Midnight Train, which is an absolutely beautiful book, and it's really all about taking advantage of those things and what are you working for, if not for the things that you love and desire the most. And I do realize how exceptionally lucky I am that I can do something like that. But so that I don't just dig into another reflection right here, I am limited for time because I ended up spending 2 days out and about. And there's stuff on my calendar for today, Thursday, June 25th, as I'm recording this. So I'm going to forego comments from recent episodes so I can get right into this. I do want to share, though, I was a guest again on the Creative Pen podcast this last Monday's episode, and it feels like forever ago when that episode came out on Monday, but I'm just reminded of how lucky I am that I have such amazing friends like Jo, and that also she's a mentor to me in so many ways. I've learned so much from her, and I even shared a reflection of something she had said in the opening section of her podcast, which I thought was interesting, and it basically, I want to reflect about it here because it's something I shared to Substack, but it's something I think is important to dig into a little bit, particularly since I was reflecting on it in that stark way that I like to reflect. So Jo was talking about Tim Ferriss, the Tim Ferriss post, and she was talking about Tim's statement that he'd rather write books for 10,000 people who are genuinely changed by them than crank out short-form videos for 10 million people who forget about them within days or minutes. And here's what Jo said.
Now, I would say here a couple of things. One, you have to insert your own number, as many books will never sell 10,000 copies. So what is your number? And I think this is really interesting. So I'd rather write books for how many people who are genuinely changed by them. What about 1,000? Would you rather write a book that sells 1,000 copies?
Now, I'm going to interject here as Mark. Most books will not sell even 1,000 copies.
Or would you write a book for 100 people whose lives are changed?
And again, I'm going to interject. Most books are not going to sell 100 copies. Now back to Jo.
Or 10 people who are genuinely changed. Or what if you can change one life with your book? Is it worth doing? And then a bigger question. What if by writing your book, the life you change is your own?
Oh, God. I love the way that woman thinks. I love the way she inspires. And I really dig what Jo was saying about that. I honestly think if I can change one person's life for the better with any one of my books that I've published, I think it's worth doing. But more importantly, writing the book can change your own life. And that's where it should start. Jo and I kind of dig into sort of that topic in a nutshell when we talk about why we write, because we both, with the fiction we write really dark stuff, not necessarily the inspiring and forward-thinking stuff, and Jo's way more forward-thinking than I am, but, the forward-thinking stuff and the positive stuff that we put out into the author community, we write really dark fiction, both of us. We love it, we relish it, but I do know that my fiction has also improved lives, not just the stuff I do in the nonfiction realm. But anyways, that episode came out on June 22nd, 2026. I'll have a link to it in the show notes. And I think every episode of Jo's podcast is good. And again, you know what? Most of the time I know I'm going to love Jo's intro stuff where she just shares industry updates and what she's thinking about. And the interview is always bonus content. And in this particular case, the interview happens to be me. But again, even the opening where Jo talks about that Tim Ferriss quote and just, nails it in terms of her reflections on that. And even talking about her predicting 10 years ago where we were going to be in terms of digital and AI and stuff like that. Just amazing to see what she was thinking about all those years ago and where we are today. But anyways, like I said, I'll have a link to that in the show notes. That's it for the introductory matter. I'm going to roll the bumper and we're going to get into this. And I'm going to try to clean as I do. I'm going to try to clean up some of the audio, but I am recording this while driving, while returning back from the campsite because I had, it was raining. It was raining early, so we got up early and we packed everything up just before the rain came, so that worked out well. And I did need to get home to get showered and get ready for a virtual author summit that I was attending, or I was a speaker at today. So, and again, having to get back to some of those other bits of work and other meetings that I have. So I'm going to record this and clean her up and roll the bumper, and then you'll get to the main content for this episode. As I leave the campsite, we stayed the last 2 nights at, I can't help thinking about Richard Louv and the nature principle and how much I enjoyed what it had to say and how I feel after spending so much time surrounded by trees, by nature, by big water. We were camping on the eastern shore of Lake Huron near Goderich, Point Farms Provincial Park, and just feel like potentially the way my phone feels when it's plugged into a power source and it's getting recharged with something valuable that it needs. The way you feel when you are hot and dehydrated, your mouth is dry, and you have a sip of beautiful, clear, cold water. That's the way I feel often, just sitting in front of the campfire, or even now, shortly after leaving the campsite, on my way home to take on the things I have to take on for work and work and work. I'm not sure what it is about that connection. Is it a connection to the world itself? Is it a connection to the simplicity of things? Is the sound of the water that I can hear just laying there in the tent, the rhythmic pulse of the water as it laps onto the shore, way down the escarpment, down to where Lake Huron is. The sound of the wind rustling through the leaves. The morning sound of the birds, and we have birds in our neighborhood. There's birds I hear in the morning in the city. There's something different about that. Even reading, I'm actually reading another book more about sort of nature, the power of trees. And yesterday when I had my camp coffee and I was just sitting in front of the fire, even though there was no fire on, but I was just sitting in the chair there, and chipmunk popped out and started scurrying about looking for things. So I went and grabbed some peanuts and just tossed them there, and was just entertained by how lovely it was just to feel a connection with this little critter. I felt a connection, of course, with Indiana, or Indy, our dog. Indy is 13 years old, golden, and legs are not doing well at all. And Indy is not able to scamper about and splash in the water and chase sticks and bite the waves, as Indy's always done, which is kind of sad, because the weight of the water, when Indy went into the water and started biting the waves, didn't go in as vigorously as Indy used to, go balls out all the way down the escarpment and stuff. We didn't let Indy do that, but when Indy got to the water and wanted to rehash some of that playing. Once Indy's back legs and fur got wet, the weight of the water in his fur was too much to hold him. His legs were that weak that he actually collapsed, and we were fearful. We managed to get him out of the water and to help him dry off. But it was kind of a sad thing to see. But unlike the piss and vinegar sort of animated, always on the go Indy that I've always known, we sat on the beach and Indy sat there just looking out at the water and just, we took turns petting him, and it was just a lovely moment. We spent a lot of time in the last couple days sitting with Indy, looking out over the water and going for shorter walks. We used to go on like an 8-kilometer loop. Indy was not able to handle that, so we went on some shorter walks and enjoyed that. But just sitting there with Indy, and we jokingly would say every time we take Indy somewhere, he's not in the moment. He's constantly thinking about the next place he's going to be. He loves camping. As he was approaching the campsite in the car, he knew exactly where we were going and was just excited because he just loves camping, and he obviously loves the water and all that stuff. But it was kind of funny that dogs do live in the moment more than humans, even though we like, there's like Indy's constantly like trying to get to the next thing. He's this weird combination of what I can be, worrying about the next thing as opposed to just enjoying and basking in the moment. So one of the reflections there is just being in the moment wherever you are in your writing career. You just finished a story, you're trying to figure out what to do with it, or a novel or whatever. You're worried about an agent, an editor, you're thinking about self-publishing, or you want to send this story off to a market. That's great, that's awesome, because you're thinking about the next thing, and you're building and growing, as we always are. But don't forget to stop and pause and be happy and joyful in the moment. I probably have a little bit of this reflection because I am about 3/4 of the way reading Matt Haig's The Midnight Train, same author of The Midnight Library. And The Midnight Train is a phenomenal book, especially if you're a book nerd. It's because it involves a man whose life is bookstores, and it's at the end of his life. He's 80, and he's basically going on a train that's taking him back through his life to see all those stops along the way. And it's a really fascinating examination of sometimes those choices we make along the way that aren't necessarily the ones that led down the right path. I think about my first marriage. Now I'm very happy where I am. I'm so ecstatic that I met Liz, and I would not have met Liz had my first marriage not died. So, and I wouldn't have a beautiful child if it wasn't for that first marriage. But I think about how I did a lot of things where I focused more on my career, I focused on work, I focused on writing, and I spent a lot of my time doing all those things, such that my ex said during one of our conversations, it was probably a conversation about whatever, and she said, writing and work is your mistress. I think about that now, especially in relation to this Matt Haig novel, and in not pausing to appreciate the things. I'm at a point in my own writing career where some pretty awesome things are happening. But things have always been. There's always been something awesome happening. There's been stretches of time between the awesomes, but Between the Awesomes, that's a good title. I should make a note of that for later on. I like that, Between the Awesomes. Are those the valleys? Is that what between the awesome means? But in any case, I have been very fortunate. Lots of wonderful things in my life, and lots of wonderful things happening in my writing. One of which I can't publicly talk about or share yet, but I'm pretty thrilled. And once the announcement is officially made, I can talk about that, and I have a fun story to tell. But even despite that achievement, which I think is pretty cool, and I realize how lucky I am to have, been in the right place at the right time, and decided to invest time and energy into something that I thought was a lost cause, nothing was going to happen, but I gave it a shot anyway. I'm still moving on to the next things. Okay, what's the next book I'm working on? Okay, when and right now when I think about where I am, I think, okay, so I've got a back and forth, so section by section with a traditional publisher. Woolsack and Wynn is publishing Ghost Stories of the Great Lakes. We've done the first 4 lakes technically, because I included a 6th lake, Lake St. Clair, by the way. So I have Lake Ontario, and I did them in the order of the backwards transition of the way the water flows through the lakes. So Lake Ontario, then Lake Erie, and then little tiny Lake St. Clair. And so we've done those 3 lakes so far. And I know probably today or tomorrow I'm gonna get Lake Huron back from Noelle, and then Lake Superior. So we've been doing the book. She's been editing it in chunks and sending it to me, and then doing that back and forth. I also have another book where an editor has this is a self-published title. The editor has, I think, about the first 60,000 words, while I'm completing the last 40,000 words. So I've done similar things like this before with a different editor, but although that was chapter by chapter because I was so far behind. But I'm thinking about all the balls in the air right now, and I'm also working on a novella project as well. And again, that's me taking a chance to invest some time in something that I'm not sure if it's going to work out. But I thought, you know what? Let's roll the dice and let's see where this takes me. If it takes me somewhere where that works out, great. And if it doesn't, I have another novella under my belt. Never hurts, right? That extra practice. But I think in the last couple days, so Liz was able to find a camping spot just prior to when the schools in Ontario are shutting down for the year. So they were relatively unpopulated, like they're like crazy busy all summer. And so the park was really quiet. There weren't a lot of people there, which was great. We were able to get a spot for a couple nights, and it meant it was like I had to rearrange a bunch of meetings. I did some meetings from either the campsite or going to the park office at Provincial Park, where there's Wi-Fi, sitting in the car and doing the meetings from there. But I did pause in nature, which was a nourishing vitamin to me, and appreciated where I was and the things I had accomplished. And I think there's something about that. And I know a couple weeks ago, or was it just last week? I can't remember. And I went for a really long walk that took me through a very beautiful nature-filled course, like a nature path, not far from where we live. And I remember just feeling connected with the trees and the leaves and the environment, and thinking about them. I guess I've been thinking about trees a lot because The Power of Trees is a great book that talks about just the way they communicate, the way they understand things, the way they pass things on to their next of kin, the way they remember. It's they're not just beautiful things standing in a field. There's an entire ecosystem that surrounds a tree. It's quite magnificent. I was feeling that connection to the trees. I was feeling that connection to nature, to the critters, to the chipmunk that was so brave, and even came out when Liz and Indy and I were sitting in front of the fire later that day, and was, shaking. You could see the little chipmunk shaking, and Indy was just sitting there watching the chipmunk. Now, Indy hates squirrels and will chase squirrels and goes nuts and hates them, but it was so cute because, chipmunk's just a little bit smaller than a squirrel. A lot cuter. But Indy's just sitting there curiously watching the chipmunk, like, what is that thing? And just enjoying watching and just being part of the moment. And the little chipmunk was, got within probably about 2 feet of the dog, like grabbing a peanut and stuffing it in his cheeks and on his way. But I think there was something really special and really recharging about those moments, and being aware of them. I think maybe that's something that as writers we do. When we catch something, when we see something, when we feel something, is that something that we tuck away that is going to be incorporated in some way, shape, or form into a scene or a character in a novel. The last thing I want to reflect a little bit on is the connection between the desire to be more analog. Yeah, okay, I had my phone on me and I was still connected and stuff like that. So it's not like I was disconnected from the world at large. I was still very connected. But getting back to nature and the simple things. We had running water at the campsite. That was me, dad joke. A forthcoming dad joke, by the way. That was me running to go get water with a bucket. That was our running water. But there is something about, I guess, the rawness or the rudimentary element of that. And as I was appreciating, obviously the luxuries that we live in the modern world, and access to, turn on a tap and there's water. Oh, and there's hot water. It comes right out, as opposed to having to boil the water to wash the dishes or whatever, right? But I was thinking about that in relation to my rediscovery of the magic of the typewriter. And that there is something grounding. There's something grounding and satisfying, not just of striking a key on a keyboard and seeing it pop up on a screen, but striking a key and seeing the physical mechanism of a key, or whatever they're actually called, flying through the air. A little poetic license there, but flying, the ribbon lifting, it's striking the ribbon and making that impression on the piece of paper. There is something so tactile and so magnificent. This is an old technology, but what a significant method of getting text onto a page. And I think because my role as a writer, your role as a writer, as a storyteller, is taking those things from the air, as it were, and turning them into words and putting those down on virtual paper. Most of us are virtual paper writers. If you do write long form, like handwriting with your like in a notebook for your first draft, I'd love to hear it. Let me know in a comment at starkreflections.ca. But there is something really interesting about that experience, about the work involved. Like it when you're doing that with the keyboard, with the typewriter, and you are watching the mechanism of all of the magnificence of what's happening, there's something really profound about that. It's almost like you can see the clockwork mechanism behind the clock, which you can't, right? In a clock, you can see it, but you can't see it in a digital timepiece. And I think that's what I'm that's what I'm experiencing when I'm typing. Is I'm more aware of the parts, at least the parts that flow from me to the page, as opposed to the parts that flow between the mystical elements in the air and how I pluck them, or the muse helps me pluck them. But I think there is something there, and it was so funny. I was so tempted. I wanted to bring the typewriter to the campsite, but I also was aware of I didn't want to annoy him with the clacking. It's not like it was that loud, but the clacking of the keys, I didn't want to annoy the other campers. So I thought, no, that's probably something I do not need to do. But the final reflection / question for you is, what are the things that you do to ground yourself? What are the things that you do to reward yourself, to pause when you've achieved something, as opposed to constantly just jumping to the next thing, as opposed to appreciating what's right there? And what are the things you do when you're in a moment and you want to capture, you want to like take a snapshot in your mind of that moment so you can recall it before writing? I guess the last sort of question is, how do you do your first drafts? Are you doing them handwritten? Somebody had commented on something I'd shared on Facebook recently, saying, "Oh yeah, every book has its own notebook. You know, that's the first draft gets put in that notebook first." Which I think is such a cool legacy that a writer could have. Right? You have all your whatever that gets donated in your name to a library or something like that, or an archive. And imagine or a handful of your first drafts are the handwritten versions that nobody saw. Kind of an interesting thing for scholars, right? As we all may ponder what it would be like to be studied the way a writer like Shakespeare is studied all those years later. But in any case, how do you do those first drafts? You do the first drafts by hand? Do you do them dictating? Do you do them typewriter, laptop? How do you do those things? Well, that is it for this episode and these reflections. I hope you enjoyed my reflective ramblings from retiring from the campsite. Is that what I'm going to name this? I don't know. But thanks so much for listening. Thanks to all my awesome patrons who support this podcast at patreon.com/starkreflections. Thanks to everyone who has left a review, and also thanks to everyone who leaves comments and shares your own reflections. Until next week, and until next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections. Okay, I have to offer my apologies. I did what I could to clean up the noise of the car. I did reduce that significantly, but oh my God, there was this ridiculously annoying clickety, 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 clickety. I mean, it sounded worse. Well, maybe I sounded better than it. But oh my God, I am so sorry. I apologize so much. I have no idea what it was. Maybe it was the way my phone was sitting in the holder and it was just vibrating against something, because it stopped when the car was stopped, when I was at like an intersection or a light or something, and it kind of got worse at some points and not others. But I probably spent about 20 minutes trying to clean that up, and I was unable to. So my apologies if that annoyed you. I'm going to try to figure out a better way to do reflections from the car. If there's a better way to record that, potentially I can more easily reduce the sound volume. I'm hip to hear ideas and thoughts from you as well. But again, thanks so much for listening. Thanks for putting up with the audio for this episode. I'll chat with you in the next episode next week.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.